Hey, how's it going? This is Dave Umphress with the Umphress Group at Keller Williams Realty Success in Denver, Colorado. And wanted to take a couple minutes and talk to you about the 10 ways that we are seeing buyers find the most success in one of the craziest markets we've ever seen. Now, every year we help a couple hundred buyers and sellers up and down the Front Range of Colorado buy and sell real estate, which is right about an hour to an hour and a half north and south of Denver, Colorado. So from Fort Collins down to Colorado Springs or Pueblo, and then up into the mountains. And that's where we are. This might apply to you significantly if you're in Colorado, or if you're outside of Colorado, it might apply a little less, but maybe similar strategies. So we are experiencing the toughest market for buyers that we've ever seen in history, and lowest inventory ever, interest rates incredibly low, pending inflation, lots of buyers are flooding into the market. For a lot of reasons, it's really competitive. And so we like to help our buyers think strategically about what they're doing and how they're approaching an offer so that they can make sure that they win the house that they really want. So the intention of this list is if you are, you'll look at lots of houses and you'll see something you could live with, and then you'll see that one house that you just have to have. And you'll say, what do I need to do? Somehow, some way, I've got to win this house. What do I do? And so that's the purpose of this list, is to say, okay, you are going to do 4 of these things originally. Why don't we find a 5th or a 6th one that we can add in to really strengthen your offer? Okay, so that's what we're going for. Number 1, pre-approved through underwriting. Most lenders will take the buyer fully pre-approved all the way through the underwriting process, so that essentially it's kind of like a cash offer. They've already done all the things. And so let me talk about the difference between pre-approval and pre-qualification real fast. So a pre-qualification is just based on what a buyer tells the lender. So if I went to a lender and said, I make this much money, this is what I do, I have this much debt, and my credit is about this. And so they'll say, okay, based on that, here's a pre-qualification for $500,000. Whereas a pre-approval, they're going to verify employment, they're going to check your tax returns, they're going to check your credit, they're going to do all the things to make sure that you are fully pre-approved. They're going to send it to the underwriter, and the underwriter is going to stamp off on it and say, you are pre-approved. Now, it's really important that a buyer has a real pre-approval in this market, at least, and not a pre-qualification. Number 2, putting at least 20% down, or if possible, paying cash. So let's talk about that. In general, if a seller is looking at 2 competing offers, and even let's say they're both conventional offers putting at least 20% down, and so payment and everything would be the same for them. But one's putting down 20%, one's putting down 25%, let's say. Well, if the person putting 20% down comes across an appraisal shortfall, let's say $10,000 that they have to come up with to make up the appraisal difference, and they have to take that $10,000 from their down payment because that's the most cash they have, that's going to change what they can actually put down on the house. They're not going to put 20% down anymore. That'll drop it to 17, 18%. And now they have an interest rate that increases. Their payment goes up quite a bit. It might even change qualifications, potentially. That could change their debt-to-income ratio, which lenders then could not approve the loan because of. It changes a lot of things. Whereas that buyer that's putting a little bit more down, the seller knows that they have the ability, the flexibility to overcome a gap like that. So paying cash, you might hear that and say, yeah, that's great, but who has cash to pay for real estate? Well, in the Denver and the Colorado market right now, a lot of people do. We're seeing a lot of cash come in from some more expensive markets, and people are not afraid of the prices here at all because they've just sold their $2-3 million house on a coast, and they've come here and they're paying cash. Because of that, we've forged a very strategic partnership with a lender that allows us to front cash to our buyer, and then once they've been approved for it, and then they pay cash for their home, so they essentially are able to lock the house down for a lot less expensive than they would have otherwise if it was financed. And then after closing, they refinance that cash purchase into a loan, into a standard loan, whatever they were going to do otherwise, for no fees at all, as long as they work with that lender on the back end on the refinance, and they'll rate match anybody else's rate. And so it's a win-win for the buyer. It's a great program. If you're in Colorado, reach out and let's talk about it, so that you can take advantage of that. But at least 20% down, or in a perfect world, paying cash would be number 2. Number 3, offering over asking price. Obviously, in this market, in most markets right now, things are not selling for at or below asking price. And the general rule of thumb that we're saying and we're seeing right now is between 5 and 10% over asking price. Now, obviously, the higher price points, as soon as you get into luxury and uber luxury markets, and super uber luxury markets, you're not going to see 10% over asking. But in the common price points, which here is maybe 500 to $1 million, we're certainly seeing 5 to 10% over asking price. We put one on the market this morning for $495. It is 2 o'clock on a Friday, and right now there are several offers, $550 being the highest. It'll probably end up above $550, and that 10% is what we've already exceeded the 10%. So general rule of thumb to think about, if it's a desirable house that's selling the first weekend, it's probably going to be 5 to 10% over asking price. Something to keep in mind. Number 4, flexibility or a seller rent back. In Colorado, we are allowed to write up a seller rent back up to 60 days. Beyond 60 days, then it needs to be a legal lease, and so the buyer and seller need to just come up with a lease that they're both going to execute. But a buyer can really win a property they like over other buyers if they're willing to let the seller remain in the property for up to 60 days after closing. So some buyers are able to do it, some buyers are not. If you find that dream house that you really have to have, you might think about how you could find a way to allow the seller to stay after. Especially in a competitive market, sellers really find value in being able to stay and close and go purchase their new one. Cash is in the bank. They don't have to write contingent offers then because they've already closed on the current house. It can really give them a lot of power and a lot of peace of mind, so that can go a long ways. Number 5, flexibility on your timeline. If you have the ability to say to a seller, here's my offer, everything else is great on it, I will close in 30 days if you'd like, or we can make it 60 or 90, or, you can choose the terms, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. You can tell us when you'd like to close. I have flexibility on my timeline. That can really give a lot of peace of mind to a seller, and it can make an offer really stand out in this market. So, number 7, purchasing as is, this is number 6. Purchasing as is probably one of the most common things that we're seeing right now. And it's funny, most purchase contracts already are as is. It says specifically in the contract, this is an as is purchase with the right to do an inspection, based on these things and these dates and such and such. We're still writing it into contracts right now when a buyer is okay with it, saying, we will purchase the property as is. We will still do an inspection, and if we find major issues at the inspection, we still reserve the right to walk away, to terminate the contract. But Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we are not going to ask you for light bulbs and small things that sometimes come up on inspection reports. And so it's a lot of peace of mind for a seller knowing that it's going to be a pretty straightforward contract. Now, if a major thing comes up, of course we can still negotiate it and ask for it because the next buyer is going to do it as well. So we might do a sewer scope and notice that there's a $15,000 sewer repair needed. Well, if they're not going to fix it for us, they're going to have to disclose it to the next buyer, and they're going to need to deal with it eventually. So there's still opportunity to negotiate inspection items, but it can be a really good way to show the seller up front that it's going to be a very, very smooth, straightforward process. Number 7, this is where it gets a little complicated. Number 7 is waiving appraisal, which most people hear that and say, I can't waive appraisal. I have a loan, and the lender is requiring me to get an appraisal. And so we're not technically waiving the appraisal. We are offering to cover the gap between the purchase price, the offer price, and where the appraisal comes in at. And so the biggest concern for sellers right now in our market is that, yes, you can offer this price way above asking price, but can you actually close at that? If it doesn't appraise at that point, are you actually willing to close at that? That's why sellers are taking cash offers almost all the time right now, because they don't have to worry about an appraisal. And in a market like this, where things are rapidly appreciating, hardly anything is going to appraise for the contract price because an appraisal is based on the last 6 months of sales. And we're pricing this based on those sales, but the offer went so much higher that it's obviously way above what any appraisal would come in at. So a buyer is saying, if I purchase it for $525 and the appraisal comes in at $505, then I will make up that $20,000 gap in cash at closing. That they can work with the lender and rework their terms to make sure that they're able to bring that much difference in cash plus their down payment. Sometimes it means you have to decrease your down payment if you don't have a lot of cash available to do that. But that is what a lot of buyers are doing right now. Even if you're not able to do it, at least you know what your competition is doing. So that is number 7, is waiving appraisal. Number 8 is increasing earnest money. So different states, some states use earnest money, some states don't, but in Colorado, earnest money is a good faith deposit that you put down at contract to say, we are committed to this house, and as long as we operate in good faith and walk away from the contract in time of our objection days, like inspection and appraisal and loan objection and things like that, the earnest money would be returned to me. It would come back to the buyer. Well, some buyers find it, I think it would be valuable if they say to the seller, we will increase the amount of earnest money that we are putting down. I can't give legal advice. Personally, this is not one of the things I think strengthen your offer all that much, but I never advise a buyer to put down more than $7,500 in earnest money if they don't have to, because then you're switching from a small claims court to dispute that earnest money to district court to dispute earnest money, which is a whole different level of fees. And so earnest money increase is something that you could do. Maybe it's a really competitive house and you are 100% sure you're going to close on it anyways, well, you might as well put down a significant amount of earnest money and just be cautious that you're protecting it if need be. So number 9, this one is very controversial right now, and that is a letter to a seller. So we are writing a love letter to the seller saying, here's who I am, and here's why you should just love me and my family or whoever's buying the house with you. And we are telling them, I typically tell people, write one paragraph about you, who you are, and what you do, and just a little bit about you. And then the next paragraph about the house, why you love the house, why you could really see yourself being in that house. Now, on the buying side, we're still suggesting that a buyer do them and try to submit them. On the listing side, we are never accepting them, because receiving a letter like that and giving it to the seller, it opens up the seller for potential discrimination issues, fair housing problems. Somebody could come back and say, I disclosed in my letter that I am of a protected class and you didn't take my offer because of that protected class. It really exposes the seller a lot. And so we advise sellers to not accept them. And then when we do receive them on our listings, we tell sellers, we think that you should not look at this, but if you insist on looking at it, we have to give it to you. So just know on the buy side, we still recommend them, but there's a really good chance they're not actually going to be presented to the seller. Now, I can't stop you from putting it in their mailbox, leaving it in their refrigerator, putting it under their doormat, knocking on their door and handing it to them. All of that's up to you, but me delivering your letter for you, just know that there's a pretty good chance that the listing agent's not going to deliver it to the seller. Number 10, last but not least, is not asking for concessions. So 10 years ago, it was pretty common for the seller to pay closing costs for the buyer. And in this market, it's just not happening. Sellers are not paying for closing costs for buyers. And if they do, all they're really concerned about is the net, what they're netting in that sale. And so if it's a $500,000 offer and then you're asking for $5,000 in closing costs and concessions to be paid, it's essentially a $495,000 offer. But the increased negative to the seller is that home still has to appraise at $500,000. It doesn't need to appraise at $495,000, even though the net to them is $495,000. So not only is it not that great for the seller in that term, it actually works against them when it comes to appraisal. And so in this market, we are telling all of our buyers, please just let's talk about options ahead of time to make sure that you don't need to ask for closing costs, so we can work with the lender. There's lots of lenders have very creative programs to make sure that there are little to no closing costs that we can roll in. So there you go. Those are the top 10 things that we are suggesting buyers do in this market to be successful. And let's come back to this list when the time is right to write the offer and look at what things we could add in and to really strengthen your offer. So good luck out there. It's a jungle, but I know with the right strategy you can be successful. So thanks for watching. Talk to you later.